Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Interlinked podcast, the official Neo Tokyo podcast powered by, funny enough, Shrapnel.
Introducing Shrapnel, a team made of AAA gaming legends and blockchain developers. They were spun out of HBO. They've won a BAFTA. They've won Emmys and 40 other entertainment awards. You'll recognize their work as it includes Halo, Call of Duty, BioShock, Westworld, and over 30 other titles, all while reaching over 100 million fans. They're building a competitive, multiplayer, first-person shooter which allows you to create, trade, and own your own created content. If you're as excited to play this game as I am, then you're going to need to pick up an extraction pack, which is currently available on their website. So hop on in there, check them out, see if an extraction pack is right for you, and you can find them on shrapnel.com. Huge shout out to our sponsor, Playa3ull Games. They are inspired by gamers and funded by their community. They have a epic game on the Epic Games Store, a third-person shooter called Nexus. Hop on in there and check that out. They're also currently selling nodes, so if you're interested, check that out at their website, playable.games. That is a 3 instead of a B on Playable. Now strap in for the rest of this episode of Interlinked.
Today we have Mr. Don Norbury, the current studio head and co-founder of Shrapnel, as well as co-founder CTO of Neon, but previously worked at Electronic Arts, LucasArts, Irrational Games, Greenlight, Microsoft, HBO, and also Binary Carnival. Don, you're a rock star. You're a legend. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, man.
And of course, my favorite co-hosts of all time, Mr. Nick, Mr. Jared. Welcome, gentlemen.
Stoked to be here.
Happy to be here. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Well, Don, I think we're all very excited. First and foremost, the Shrap hoodie is absolutely on point. It's just, it's clutch. We all really want one. But would love to jump back in time, get to know more about the origin story of Shrapnel and you. How did it all come together? How did you get here? You're obviously one of the hottest games in the whole industry right now. But at one point, you were just a little idea. Where'd that idea come from?
Yeah, we were just a veritable twinkle in an eye. And it's, we crossed the 2-year mark last October. From kind of like our seed funding founding. Yes, thank you. So it's been like a good time for reflection because there's been a lot of steps from that point on, right? We were just 6 people at that point trying to kind of figure it out. And we had done about a year's worth of production on a couple other games at that point. All of our founders came out of HBO. We all had worked with each other in some capacity, just not as intimately and directly as we did at HBO. Like we all came out of Xbox at some point. Mark Long, our CEO, was the head of xCloud at Microsoft, which was like the whole game streaming thing, and then eventually kind of encompassed PlayFab, and now it's Xbox Live, and like all of that's the same thing. So he like spearheaded that. I was more on the kind of game production side, doing a global publishing initiative, like portfolio management for titles. And then like Mark Yen, who was our CMO, was part of Central Media and kind of did a bunch of audio design and marketing stuff. So it was sort of like we knew each other, but when you're working more intimately and you're like traveling a bunch with each other, you get to know each other really quickly. And we were very quickly like, all right, this team's dope. It was like a really, really high performing team. And HBO started not becoming HBO anymore, which you can see. Now you can see the corpse, like the long dead corpse of what it used to be, right? In the form of Max. And just like, I think Apple Plus actually is maybe poised to be the next version of what HBO used to be. So, about a year into that process with this like talented team is when we kind of started devising the spin out that became Neon. And in its initial stages coming out of HBO, we were tied actually to HBO IP. We had a Dune working title and a Game of Thrones working title. The Dune one eventually turned into a Foundation working title, as well as we were doing like virtual production work for film stuff, so for Hollywood stuff. And it's all kind of, adjacent to what we are always behind, like what our motivation always is, which is like the cutting edge of technology to make just like dope entertainment. So virtual production is certainly that. Blockchain also was that, and we kind of got looped in about a year after the origins of Neon into the whole blockchain gaming side of it. So there'd always been this twinkle in the eye, as we called it before, of like a game that people age. We have this like generations of creators in Minecraft and Roblox. They have declarative tool sets for creating stuff, and they age out of those things, and there's not really anywhere to go. Like Fortnite's creator mode's trying to have a piece of that. Certainly UEFN is the latest kind of in that space. But a lot of those are like kind of sandboxy, or they're almost like Neil Stephenson metaverse focused to them. They don't really have an identity. They don't have anything edgy or like adult feeling. They're these like very cartoony kind of everyone feels safe here worlds. We wanted to do something, and I think the other part of this was like rose-tinted glasses from our starts in game industry, which were very largely like modding scenes back in the early 2000s, like late 90s, and those were like kind of edgy games because it was still technophile at that point. It's very like niche communities that did this sort of stuff, and we all kind of created our own content within those spaces. So we're like, it's not a sandbox. It needs to be this thing that has world building and a story and like a place you want to go, and then create your own stuff in that place, right? So that notion had existed for a long time. That was the half nugget of Shrapnel, and then the other half was, if you're going to do this, like the stuff you're making needs to be yours, like for realsies. And I'm a huge proponent and have been for a long time since I was at Microsoft when we acquired Minecraft. And ever since like going through that cycle, I've been a huge proponent of self-sustaining systems, self-sustaining ecosystems. So I was like, how do we shape this, along with this technology that's going to enable it into something where we're not on the content treadmill constantly, where it becomes this ecosystem that like the creators and the players and the promoters and everybody's rewarded accordingly. And we're like helping the snowball continue to roll down the hill, by improving tools and improving content and everything. But like, how do we craft this in a way that makes sense for the community, and then get the ball started? And of course, like our swing back then is immature, right? It's like naive in retrospect. It's certainly matured a lot since then in terms of like not just understanding the ecosystem and the community and the like size and space of it, but also the technology. And in a way, kind of we've gone the opposite direction you would expect, which is instead of imagining things we could do with the technology that turns out we can't do, bringing on people like Mark Mercuri to our team, who was, he was the head of blockchain for Microsoft for a long time, and then he was SVP at Consensus over in Fura and all that sort of stuff. So it's like he actually did the opposite. He kind of came onto the team and was like, no, man, we can do like way more shit than that. Like this is going to be like a very deep tech exploration of a platform that we're going to build Shrapnel on that enables all of this stuff nobody's ever done in blockchain land before. And that's kind of like takes us to current day, from the 6 to the 70 some odd people that we are nowadays, with what I consider to be not just like a good game mode, in terms of the extraction game mode and the session story and the way that's going to evolve over time, but also the kind of like game blockchain platform that we've built behind it, sort of like how you need to build Xbox Live to make matchmaking and everything work for Halo 2, right? And like the social systems that were on platform, like we've just needed to build this. And because of Mark Mercuri, we've built it in this like malleable, expressible way. Sorry, I got on my soapbox for a long time there.
No, that's the beauty of the long form podcast is we love the soapbox. I'd love to dive into the user generated content portion of it. That's something that I'm particularly excited about. I got, first really got to dip or like really sink my teeth into it when they had Halo Forge and they were making those ninja maps. I don't know if any of you guys ever played those, where you would like, essentially they would lay out these giant obstacle courses it's so much fun. And they're so hard. But that was like the first time I'm like, oh my gosh, someone just sat there and made this. And being able to sort of weaponize or enable your community to be able to generate the content that they want in their own universe. That's something that I'm really excited about in Shrapnel. So would love to get a little bit of a deep dive drill down on that.
For sure. And normally I start from like the bottom up of that description, but since you mentioned something like Forge, I'll actually start with like the map side of it. Because it is the most complicated of all the different, what we'll just call asset classes, that you can create with the tools. Our approach is similar to Forge-ish, I would say, in that it's in the client, right? You don't download a separate editor. It's in situ in the client. You can pop in and like play test your game very quickly. It's a tool set and a way that everything interacts that's been curated so that you're not just trying to use Unreal to like Unreal Editor and then gajillion things it can do and do wrong. It's like we're constraining it so that people have a high probability of success. I would say it's the long pole in terms of the creator tools, but we're definitely going to be rolling out, especially to partners like Next that did the UEFN map, kind of working with those types of partners to play not just with the tool set, but also some like prefab, like kit bash stuff that gives a different aesthetic ahead of seasonal updates. But that is the most complicated type of content that you can make. We can't go as far as what you're describing with Forge, Forge or like Media Molecule and Little Big Planet, right? They can let you make any type of game that you want. It's certainly something that we're looking to enable in the future, but there's a question mark around how digital assets are handled and how token is handled when you get into that space. Because if you did play Little Big Planet, then the number one community map within the first like day, maybe 2 days, and stayed at the top is a map called Get All Achievements, where you go in, you like select it, you spawn in, you put your controller down, and it makes your Sackboy fly through the map. And when you're done, you have all the achievements for the game. It's like the example I always use with my team when I'm like, this is how, not abuse, but when you give people the power, that's what you're going to get out of it. So of course, when you're like digital assets and tokens, there's a lot more security and macroeconomic concerns around it. So we have to put like a wall around it somehow. And for us, out of the gate, that's the game mode itself. That's the way loot gets populated into the map. Like we control that. There's a system behind it that controls that as a service. So people are building maps that are fun, and then we're doing the stuff that can be like economically impactful procedurally into the map. Now, we certainly want to expand the tool set so that like we don't have that economic risk and still incentivize people to play and somehow like break that off into its own thing. We definitely want to do stuff around that. It's just you got to like scope it somehow out of the gate, right? So then going all the way to where I typically would start in describing this framework is kind of from the bottom up, which is like what is the most approachable foundational piece of content you can make. So we call them insignias. It's effectively sticker sheet editing. If you've ever used Forza's livery editor, it's sort of like that, like layered sticker sheets. You can have 1,000 layers of them. You pull these like decals from like a palette, and you can just layer them and manipulate them, color them, like do whatever you want. And some people just use like a few of them, and they're like, "That's my brand." We've had already tons of community people who have like thousands of layers who do stuff. They'll make gradients by just like slightly palette shifting with the same shape over, and it also, for us starts to create kind of task streams where like maybe we should support gradients as part of the tool, right? Mm-hmm. But in the meantime, these dedicated people are spending hours like making dope shit in insignias, and you're going to get that full swath of different quality and styles. Some people are like super retro art, vaporwave, like all over the place, right? So it's a very understandable atomic piece of content. The thing it spits out is a particular like canvas of this thing that you're building. But it's a building block. It's not just like an identity in your brand, but it's also a building block that feeds up into the more complex content as well. So when you get to the skin tool works by letting you take decals as well as insignias if you publish insignias, and then use them to manipulate on top of meshes to effectively like paint them. And right now, it's not, we don't have like the super complicated material expressions that we're shooting for more towards the end of the year. But right now, it's mostly, if you're familiar in like rendering, it's like albedo manipulations, like color manipulation, but the like materials kind of are the same as the base materials. But it, effectively lets you spray paint meshes and skins the way you want, and you're using these like atomics and these like atomic emblems in order to do that manipulation. And then as you move to the map, those are also a thing that you can apply as kind of your own customization layer on top of these kit bash and prefabs in the maps that let you like paint it or put your brand on the wall or whatever. And that's kind of how we think. We're like, we want everyone to be able to create something. And then we want the really dedicated people to be able to create like complicated, awesome stuff that other people experience. And then we want to not just like have the marketplace reward people, but also reward people based on a performance basis of how they create awesome content that people love and is getting traded a lot. Or in the case of maps, is getting played a lot.
On that note, when somebody, let's say like they create their own custom space, and then within that space they're doing their custom decals and insignias and whatnot, are you guys thinking like you kind of want to take it to a point where maybe there are assets that they can create, and that can be like their own little brand within the greater brand, and then they kind of have like their own business within your business essentially, and then you might be able to take some percentage of that transaction volume or somehow use that to where they could almost redeploy that into resources around the map that then the players that come play their map could get a part of, or something like that. Like how deeply are we really thinking about this? Where does that kind of go end game?
Yeah. So the term we use internally is the attribution system, where you have you could think of it as a royalty, I guess, but it's more like a licensing than it is a royalty. It's not like we have a notion of royalties as well, but this is more like, hey, you're using my stuff in this thing that's like like making Shrap rewards because it's performing well. You are like using my licensed stuff, and there's some terms to that. Of course, we want that attribution chain to go all the way through all of the content, depending on how it's used. Right now, we have the notion of what we call remixable for the insignia. So when you publish an insignia, and I'm trying to think of we do this thing with our release management where we have like a very internal, if you're familiar with flighting and like flighting circles, which is like how you widen the number of people who have access to stuff. So we all come from like Microsoft and like the big publishers and have a very kind of strict sense to how release management needs to work to make sure it doesn't fall over. I'm trying to think of where the insignia publishing is. All of this effectively works, but like it's a limited audience, I think, right now. Which is when you publish it, there's an option that says like this is remixable, or it's not remixable. We're in the process of adding like, hey, these are the terms of remixability that you can add, and you want it to be expressive enough to where people kind of get what they want out of it, but simple enough to where it doesn't feel like you need legal counsel every time you're defining one of these. So that's a line that we're trying to balance on. And of course, the like deeper that gets, the more complicated it gets in terms of like trickle down attribution. If you make a remixable insignia that then is used in somebody else's skin, you've got like one indirection of attribution. If it's not like a weapon skin, but instead is like a prefab. So we always use the exploding barrel. It's an exploding barrel that you put somebody's remixable insignia on, and then that exploding barrel gets used in a map. Like then you have two levels of indirection that go down to the remixable insignia. Like how does that work? So we haven't like nailed down the second level of indirection yet. I have my idea, and we'd love to fight about that stuff, especially with our head of economy, Francis, as well as I'm sure you all know Francis Brankin, as well as Clint, who is our creative director. But those are the exact discussions basically that we're having right now.
Yeah, that's like I'm an attorney, and that's sort of like, ooh, you're speaking my language when you're talking about licensing. And this, this may be kind of boring for a lot of people, but me, I find this really exciting. So, how do you and Shrapnel go about protecting your intellectual property while at the same time allowing other people to? I'm assuming this is all deep within your terms of service, and how do you protect that? And sort of the second question is, what do you allow them, and what do you allow them to use as far as your trademarks and any of your copyright? And what do you allow them to do? And do they get to keep some of their intellectual property created within the game with your tools? Those are kind of the questions I would have on that.
Yes, all they effectively become the IP owners for what they create. In those terms is effectively unlimited license to use that IP within Shrapnel as a game and an ecosystem. That also means that we get to control the expression of it, and that's mostly an abuse prevention vector that says like we can't take that thing away from you, but we can say that either it's banned outright or it only shows up to certain like geopolitical regions for various reasons. And we have like we're not at the throughput where we've had a ton of that to have to deal with right now. So the customers like response channels and everything, I wouldn't say they're entirely manual, but they're not like wildly scalable right now. But like that currently our moderation and our like kind of legal approach is in that framework. We are going to be in terms of like using Shrapnel stuff. Like our IP is our IP, so we give you the decals to use as an example and insignias. Those are effectively like license free. So like even though we made them for use in this editor, anything you make with them is fair game. We're also going to be working with partners of every different ilk in terms of adding decal packs, right? So if you want, we always use the like Balenciaga example, a decal pack that you want to put in there. Like what are the terms around that? And we anticipate having to do like some special restrictions and deals around how that works as well. Like you can't just put a Balenciaga decal and then have it remixable and they're going to want to like understand how that works. But we do want people to be able to create that type of content themselves, and like sell it so that it's reused and understand like the terms. But like as table stakes, the IP is not ours. Like our IP is ours that we create, and we actually participate in the marketplace as our user is Shrapnel Official. So we're there, like participate, making our own stuff, selling our own stuff alongside everyone else. And our internal success metric is actually like our stuff is not the most popular. Like we want to be less than 50% of the market. We want to be less than 50% of the hours played in terms of map content. When we hit that like metric in terms of KPI measuring, that's when we're doing what we need to do. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And at that point, you sort of got what you're talking about, a snowball effect where other people are, building upon you and using you as more of a tool, and your game is still there in the background, but now it's sort of an ecosystem that lives on. And that's fascinating. And I know a lot of people like maybe Balenciaga or some other ones who maybe would put a pack in there. Some of them may have issues on putting their name on guns or things like that. I mean, there's a lot of things to think about. And those restrictions, or that's when, the lawyers would come in and sign those agreements. And then you would go in on the back end, I assume, and make sure that those things aren't, or that specific, decal wouldn't go in certain areas and all that. And that's really fascinating to me. And I know a lot of people have, when they do those types of collaborations, have a lot of rules on what can and can't be done with it. I love the way you have it set up. I think that's a great way to encourage people to come in and get them to build their own intellectual property and know that they're going to have a stake in it and that they, can gain from it. And I think that's the right way and the best way to create an ecosystem that's thriving and building. And I think that's wonderful. I love the way you have that set up.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we put a ton of thought actually into that side, as well as in terms of how it's reflected blockchain wise, not just like a metadata design perspective, or just a like business practice perspective, but like making sure these things are adhered to and respected, even in the transference of stuff that the creator makes something, somebody buys it, it's getting resold, like the creator control versus which is in the traditional IP versus like when I sell this, now it's yours to do with as you see fit. Like those controls exist at the blockchain level as well, and in terms of how we've done our item templates. Yeah, and it's sort of like having gone through this whole process, we've ended up. This is why I use like Xbox Live as an example. We've sort of ended up with this platform that does a lot more than we expected it to do from a more malleable perspective. Like we're talking with tons of other game studios and even some like not game industry partners right now about using our platform, looking to like onboard people over the next year, just because it's created with this sort of ethos in mind and is very attractive for a lot of the stuff people want to do.
Wait a second.
Yeah, and
is
it
that
makes
a little bit of alpha there? Is that?
Oh yeah,
Is that like a
Yeah,
B2B?
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. We have it's called Mercury. We've been calling it GameBridge internally, a code name for it. Once we started realizing what we had on our hands, and it's sort of like I said, maybe Unreal Engine to make Unreal Tournament's another good analogy. You just sort of end up with it, and then you start talking with other people who are using other stuff and realize that your approach and platform is considerably more mature than you thought it was as compared to the state of everything else. So it's like then it kind of snowballed into all these conversations going on. So yeah, it's something we're putting more dedicated formality around for this year. So we can definitely chat further. You'll be seeing some like more official announcements around it in the next couple months.
Love that.
that's
Hopefully
that's
there's
fascinating.
hopefully there's some use for the Shrap token in
Oh yeah.
regards to that piece of it too.
Yeah, I mean, we actually, that's you can see it in kind of the ethos of how we built Shrap and it being community owned, and also just the part of what makes the platform work as well as it does, being like omni-chain and like everything goes everywhere, also lends itself to Shrap token, and it's like how it can be used by other platforms and projects. There's also a few of those that are in production already, that are kind of like they use Shrap IP or Shrapnel IP. So from an organizational perspective, when we think about like Neon and Shrapnel and the Mercury platform and how it all works, it's still like ushered almost as like a licensing perspective because Shrapnel IP is being used in it. But ultimately, like we don't want to hard define like how they want the mechanisms to use or what the game is or whatever. It's more from a like IP licensing perspective. So yeah, we started that in kind of November as its own dedicated work stream, because we were getting enough interest. We're like, all right, this needs production heads behind it, some serious thought behind it. Somebody, like our DAO Radon, now that it's like full steam, is also thinking very heavily in that space, right? So they're leaning on us from a content creation, IP shepherding perspective, and then kind of doing their own thing from the Shrap token, like strategizing perspective.
And what was it like coming from? I know a lot of you guys, you said, came from Microsoft. I think that's a really good perspective to see, as far as the protection of intellectual property, where, that's a huge brand name. Also, HBO, you mentioned another, at some point, was a huge brand name, now Max. But talk about that and how that sort of shaped you guys. And also, I'm assuming when you were there, sort of in Microsoft, what was like the gaming crew like? Was that sort of like a group of misfits within Microsoft? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, it was. I would say it's a group of misfits within Microsoft by Microsoft standards.
Right.
Compared to the whole rest of the game industry, I would say it's far more mature and process driven, almost to a point where it's a little stifling. I would say when we get, like I said, a large portion of our teams from Xbox, a lot of us work directly together in Xbox. We kind of have to wash the Microsoft off people when they join here directly at like this point in the project, because it's as much as the rigor process and having your homework and production the way you like frame data and make decisions is very strong at Microsoft. You can go way too far and just reduce your agility to zero. And the place is that sort of place. Like you get these little bubbles and nuggets at Microsoft of startup energy until somebody notices them. And then somebody comes in and is like, I'm going to create an organization around this, and that P&L is going to roll up this way, and I'm going to just do the Mount Olympus politics, right? And that's when like the good idea dies in Microsoft land, or becomes something that like is not, doesn't even resemble its initial shape. So that like those things do exist in Microsoft, but they're rare. Like you almost have to not be on a successful product team. You have to be part of one of these R&D groups or one of these incubators, basically. So I would say like, but within Microsoft, by comparison, Xbox is way more cowboy than anything. And I remember like when I came to my interview, they actually put you in Redmond Town Center, which is it's like put you in a hotel there, and they have this whole like shuttle system that takes you to every building that you need to go to. And so at the time, studios like Xbox Studios was in the studios section, which is in this part of campus where there's like a soccer field and like a mall basically with a bunch of food in it, and it's away from Redmond Town Center. So they give you the instructions. They're like, go to here, have your breakfast, go here, tell them you need to go here. A Prius or whatever will come and take you to where you need to go. And the building that I walked into, I have no idea what they actually made in that building. But you walk in and it's like, Poindexter, like belt and suspenders, literally like pocket protector shit, right? And I'm like, holy fuck, I made the wrong decision. I don't know if I want to come to Microsoft to Xbox. But thankfully, like they take you to studios, and I walk in, and it was the diorama from like the Halo 3 campaign, like the Believe campaign, and like the big Master Chief and some Gears of War, and like I'm like, oh, everybody here kind of looks like me in terms of how we're in a hoodie for the most part, right? It's like this is a different part of Microsoft than the rest of Microsoft. Yeah.
This will work.
HBO. It's interesting when I went to HBO because everybody, for the first month that I was there was this repeating message to me where people are like, it's a media company, not a tech company. It's a media company, not a tech company. I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, why do you keep telling me that? And then I would hit these like policy walls and infrastructure walls. And I'm like, dude, what? Just like, who cares about like XYZ? Like, I know more about this than you do. Like this IT team and how they have to buckle everything down. And you get to a point where like, screw this. Like, I'm just going to do whatever I want and not ask for permission. And they're not going to know because HBO is spread, the business units in New York City and Hudson Yards. And then the tech part is in Seattle, and then the Hollywood part, right, is in Burbank or somewhere in LA. So it's like we're the tech house, man. We're just like, I'm not going to ask for permission from some random dude in New York to do whatever I need to do, right? I will say, even though it was on its dying breath, the culture at HBO is very much like respect for creative vision and achieving it, like putting it on a pedestal, which I fully appreciated. Even in Microsoft Publishing, that's like how we wanted to shepherd the projects in our portfolio. Certainly, when I was at Irrational, I was like team member number 6 or something for BioShock Infinite, and like Ken Levine, like that's the like his vision drives all of it. So I'm used to that approach, and HBO. Like was the core of their culture. So we got at least the dying breath of that, as well as just world building, storytelling, like creative development, what it means to have a writer's room, what it means to have like no fear about the dumb idea that you're about to throw out because like somebody will like take it and turn it into something amazing, right? Like just being able to have that environment and culture was very strong at HBO. So you can see with Shrapnel, even though it's like a multiplayer FPS, right? You can still see like hopefully some of the like world building and story and like those pieces that we know is important to draw people in, and also because it makes us more excited to be in the space. It's this thing that like we have our own little stories about, and like the different characters and different like political events and what's happening, and then from those little stories you build in your own head, they become like moments in the game or in the transmedia that surrounds the actual game.
No, I love that. One of my favorite things about Web3 gaming actually has nothing to do with Web3, as sacrilegious as that is, which is just how it brings the community along for the ride during game dev. Because that was something that I really remember in the 360 to Xbox One era was done very well by Gears of War. They used to, like almost a year or two before the game would come out, you're getting these dev diaries about what they're thinking about retches, what they're thinking about achievements. And that's something that I've really found has been exemplified in Web3, that there's these dev diaries, which you guys have been doing a great job with. So would love to hear sort of what your thinking is around that and bringing sort of this community along for the ride.
Yeah, I love that. We actually, as a timely question too, because our PR agency, Waxman, we like feed them kind of briefs and bylines for conferences over the course of the year, and one of them is this. I think warts and all or something was the title that I put against it, which is it's horrifying for especially our studio's half like AAA game devs and the other half's degens. So it's like for the AAA game devs, we bury our heads in the sand for 4 years before you see anything, right? And it has been created and destroyed more times than most people would ever be comfortable even realizing. So to do it all in public, and it's still like probably a more shrouded version than it should be, but we do our best in terms of like unclenching the veritable butthole for the rest of the team. And I try to like lead them through that. I'm like, it'll feel so much better when you just release it and are like talk to the community and are like honest about what you're doing and they want to hear like the problems and the solutions, right? And people are like, no, God, my like normally my marketing team would shoot me in the head if I did anything like this. And like, marketing team wants you to do this as much as I do. But it's hard, man, because it's like you also don't want to disappoint people in terms of them getting glued to a piece of it that you end up killing, because that happens, especially from a creative director. They need to look after the whole thing and then make it cohesive, right? And be like, that thing that you love doesn't make any sense in this anymore. Sorry. But it's definitely been a journey. It's changed the shape of marketing. It's changed the shape of business development. It's changed the shape of like projections of how we go about rolling it out into the public and the approach we're taking, right? We're about to launch STX, which are shrapnel training exercises, the early access experience. And that's going to be, it's very purposefully like a focal set of people. And we're doing like focal days and hours on days, right? With like a fat like Sigma leaderboard reward pool and missions that will reward you with like badges and skins. So we're like, incentivizing people to play this thing that's going to be like heartbroken, right? Because it's early access. Like that's the reality of how this all works. And we're doing it because like you don't know how hardened your game is until it's been in public. And this gives us this like opportunity you don't typically have to get it. To go through it directly with the community, to get objective feedback from the data, to get subjective feedback in terms of how people feel about it, what works, what doesn't. Whereas normally we'd be basically just like be doing agent testing or paying for like global concurrency for like one day, right? Like in one beat to be like, okay, we think it might not fall over. And then if you're like a Blizzard, you'll do like an alpha test where you try and get like 1 million people in, and we'll hit that point like further down the line. But that's like the hard approach we're taking of like let it all fly. And like these are the daily conversations I'm having internally, where it's like bar setting, like where we sit in these readiness meetings and triage meetings like daily, literally, and it's like what works, what doesn't, like how good is that, how bad is that, like how reliable is this, like what are our crashes, are we having matchmaking issues, yada yada, like how good is good enough. And then you just keep raising that bar for each beat that you go out, right? And then we're the focal part of that like keeps it so that we can take actionable feedback. So if it's live all the time, then everyone's doing like live ops all the time. So it gives us time to be like, no, we're gonna fix this for this next beat, fix this for this next beat, and have those fixes be very purposefully around things like matchmaking and session management and stability and whatnot. And then have a big beat where there's a huge content update. There's new features, new systems. You got like player progressions, heavier monetization starting to creep its way in and like different pieces, like a little bit so we can see how the community responds to things. And then as we go out to, I think right now it's slated sometime around July is where the game becomes always on. So that's when we're in full live ops mode. By that point, we've increased the ramp of user base, like our DAO and our concurrency, to where you can flip that switch, get healthy matchmaking. And then you move towards the end of the year, which is when we open it up completely to the public. It's full free to play. All the monetization pieces are in there to support a free to play title. And that kind of, takes you from like now to the end of the year on that journey. And there's going to be a lot like we use the term internally, like we haven't properly been hit in the face yet. Every game goes through this. This like STX1 will be when we get hit in the face for the first time. Hopefully it's not too bad because of the community we have and like what we're doing. But you got to build a little bit of callus, on your nose and your cheek, and prepare for it because it doesn't get better. It gets worse the more and more people you have jumping in. And as much as we're here for the mass adoption, right? We're here to get to like 100 million players, but it also means that the community is going to get diluted from the like great community we have now. It's going to be the normal game player community, which has tendency towards more toxicity and whatnot. So it's going to change over time, and then we're going to lament, where our success basically, and long for the days of yore when it was just the Web3 audience.
I want to touch on. Oh, go ahead, Jared.
No, I was going to touch on the Shrap token and kind of the tokenomics about it, and sort of what that started off as the idea and how that evolved into what it is now, and kind of what your plans are for the future and what that team looks like as far as the makeup of it. I'm really curious about that. Ben, sorry to jump in there.
I was going to ask basically the same thing.
Yeah, by the team you mean like who's on like token economics team?
Exactly, the tokenomics team. That's what I was curious about.
Yeah, so the shape that it is now is very similar to what it was even from kind of white paper and inception. It is obviously a medium of exchange. It's also what you need in order to publish content is like a major usage of it. We have a bunch of what I'll classify as like character and account boosts that allow you to effectively like infuse it. And we want to change those things from season to season. So it's less of like you're paying with it, and it's more like you're infusing it to get the perks and the boosts that you want into like you can think of things like extra locker space, extra bag space, like those sorts of things. Additionally, it's the reward structure from like a fountain perspective for obviously like players playing and doing some of the missions, playing in new maps that people might not want to jump into. So it's part of the system that like incentivizes playtime on new content and fresh content that people aren't discovering yet. As well as a way to reward. So I talked a little bit about moderation when we're talking about like IP, and of course you're going to have like, that's my IP, that's offensive, yada yada. Right now we have our own kind of traditional moderation pipeline for it, but we want to move that also into being a Shrap incentivized thing. So in the same way as you have like player missions, we've always thought about Shrap as like this production value tied thing. And for an individual user, it's a reward for things that provide production value. In some ways, like obviously, playing maps that aren't being played, moderating content, like, hey, I'm going to select this sort of activity I want to do today. That's something that like the platform needs. And you're going to get a form of content, and multiple people are going to get that same content for you to actually moderate, right? And it's in a like algorithm that makes it so you can't have these associations of people either like artificially reporting and then responding, or having bad content get through because of the set of people that are moderating it. So distributing and decentralizing the way that content gets moderated, and then rewarding people for going through the process, but also people who are like legitimately reporting stuff that should be reported and punishing people who are erroneously reporting stuff that's like legitimate content for the platform. So those are some of the like ways internally to the Shrapnel platform and ecosystem that like the Shrap tokens use. And then of course there's the external projects that we're working with that are effectively going to use Shrap as their currency, their medium of exchange right out of the gate. We have some of those are games. At least one of them we're talking to now is sort of like call it like a entertainment based drop shipper that integrates with your marketplace, but then also like has Shrap as one of the currencies that you can use in it. So not just for you wanting to like engage with Shrapnel items, but any of the items that are on their platform. So those sorts of things, we're also working with them to have Shrap be a medium exchange like for their platforms as well. And it's, they're all like in that for Shrap, when we think about it, it's got to be something that the Shrapnel IP makes sense within, as opposed to something like Mercury as a platform where you're thinking very holistically across not maybe just even the game industry, but like industrial sector, like manufacturing, et cetera. That's going to have a completely different purview to it. But so for Shrap, it's always going to be whether it's, loot boxes or like game spectating or that sort of thing. It's going to be related. If Shrap is usable in that ecosystem, it's going to be related to like something Shrapnel the game makes sense in.
And maybe you can kind of bring us through this idea of how you decided, one, which blockchain to build on or build with, and the evolution of moving from building traditionally into now building with blockchain. I know you touched on it a little bit, and you kind of talked about your blockchain wizard that's with you guys. I mean, you can just kind of tell us that story.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly like at the beginning of Shrapnel, the thing that everyone would pester me about every day because I'm the CTO for Neon. So they're like, you're the tech guy. You got to decide this, right? And even though there's only 6 of us, and it took months. I had a comprehensive matrix of trade-offs, effectively things like security, partnerships, network momentum, like shared block space. Different like the friction transferring between like when you look at something like Polygon, like how hard is it for me to transfer assets to a different layer, to a different chain, like all of those different dimensions around it. And there's almost always like as much as you go up in this category, you go equally down in this other category. Avalanche was like the one with their subnet architecture that let us have for the first time not quite like some of those trade-offs disappeared. And allowed us to not have to share block space, right? So we could ensure that like a good Fortnite day doesn't take down Shrapnel because everyone's trading really hard. It allowed us to define, and this like all of these things also are effectively became like Mercury options, like infrastructure options. It's like, do you want a gasless environment? Because for games, it's not like having an L1 token where you want this like token to be represented of just the transaction volume that's happening, on the chain, like the state update velocity that's happening. There's plenty of other things happening that represent the production value of what's going on in a game, right? And you also there's a lot of implicit transactions that are happening in a game. It's not all somebody signing something. You need to be able to like do things behind the scenes. And to do that, it needs to have typically a custodial wallet, and it needs to be a gasless environment. So you still need gas because it's consensus mechanism and like prioritization, how like everything's getting validated. But allow us to abstract it away from Shrap as a utility token into this thing that we basically have like a gas station that just like pumps it out for whatever it's needed to make everything work. So those sorts of things that allowed us to craft what we consider like our production chain, because we built everything to be completely omni-chain. Like you can take all like the token and all the assets to any of the ones we've supported direct, bridging on. And everything's built on like layer zero foundation. We have a really good relationship with them. So when we think about like Avalanche as our current like partnership, it's very much like game production operations. You get in the game and you're playing it, like where is all that core stuff happening? That's Avalanche. We don't want people to have the like illusion that it's only an Avalanche thing, right? It's just, so a lot of people, especially the Web2 crowd who comes in, are not going to give a shit about any of it. The only thing they're going to care about is it functions at the speed and responsiveness that they expect in a game, and that's it, right? And then they can go buy and sell stuff in our marketplace. And the more savvy degens, which will certainly become an ever increasingly sized crowd over time, but it's going to be like at a margin compared to the rest of the players. But as that grows over time, like we've built in the capabilities already, you can see them right in the platform and ecosystem for people to take their stuff wherever they want and use it however they want.
The bridging portion's super cool. I do wonder in a Ready Player One-esque future metaverse if the bridges themselves go away and people end up using games as bridges just because of the user experience is so much better. And they're like, oh, I'd rather actually put my assets into this game to be able to easily bridge them instead of using the traditional bridges with their vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I mean, we can't provide the bridge in, right? But our bridge out is very much wrapped in, like you go into your account, right? It's a Shrapnel account, and you just say, I want to transfer this, right? And it works through a very familiar UI paradigm for people who are maybe not even familiar with blockchain. Coming in is a completely like different story, and where people are taking it and then how they're eventually getting it back. And certainly when you talk about, this is something we've been talking about a lot recently, which is like inventory swaps effectively, where it's like you have whether it's Oracle driven or some like abstraction of value that can not stable coined, but have a like stable value assessment across different items and different games, and then able to like transfer, like I don't want to play this anymore, I want to play this. There's some sort of like premium over the top, but it lets me very quickly like not just stop playing this and play this, but like, oh, I have a lot here and I want more here, and allows them to have that like value transferal. I think that's an insanely valuable concept that will catch on very quickly. But it's not just the concept itself. Like you can have a slick UI and like a really clear way for that to work, but ultimately like the games have to be there. There has to be like enough of a momentum there, and it's all like customer acquisition and retention and retargeting, right? Like once you get the more and more titles you have under that space, you get like a lot of these zero sum approaches where like, no, that's competitive or whatever. Like, dude, they're gonna go fucking play that game anyway if they want to. You might as well make it easy for them to do that, and then make it easy for them to come back, right? Or get players from there that you weren't normally going to have. Like it's not going to stop it. You're just going to make it like easier for them to go back and forth and keep you on their like rotation of games. Some people are going to be super sticky, but not everybody's going to be that way. Like the reality is people are always going to go play the hot number that month. It's just like, do they come back, right? And certainly in FPS games that are sticky, it's actually the highest. They come back at a way higher rate than they do most games. I think MMOs are probably the other one that are like really high. But most games, it's like once they go to another one, they're gone and they'll never come back. Like in Assassin's Creed, you're playing Assassin's Creed, and then Cyberpunk comes out, and it's like anachronistic the way I'm talking about it, but like that shit happens, right? It's like, no, you go and you dive into that and you completely forgot. If you come back to that years later, you're like, what the hell was I doing in this game at this time? I don't even remember. Yeah.
Nick is actually part Ezio Auditore, so he's actually always playing Assassin's Creed.
It definitely has the look. Yes. Yes, I can see it now.
I've played. Oh my gosh! Don't even get me started on that. Mirage just broke my heart. So
yeah.
I don't even like hearing Assassin's Creed right now.
I guess the question is, do you have all your fingers? Yeah, exactly.
Awesome, guys. Well, Don, I know we booked you for the hour, so really want to be respectful of your time here. We typically have just a couple of like random been going on in the market things that we touch on at the end of each episode that we kind of add as this bonus segment at the end.
Sure.
You know, feel free to stick around with us if you have the time. No pressure either way. But would like to just get one last answer from you here. Obviously, we're at a really cool point in time in the world of crypto gaming. We're at the beginning of 2024. We've made it through so many things. The Bitcoin ETF just happened, which really has now put crypto on the map in a really big way. Woohoo for us. Where do you kind of see right now as like the current state of crypto gaming, Web3 gaming? We had Yatsu on last week, and he had a very exciting take on it. He's like, previously, 2023 was like a cleanup year. We've kind of got everything, got our T's crossed and our I's dotted, and we're ready to explode. I happen to agree, feel a similar sentiment, but really want to get your take on this. So where are we, and what do you kind of think is happening, not from a price perspective, but from like an actual industry and development, and we're building something really special here perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that sentiment that we're well, I've always actually said that, and I've had plenty of people disagree with me that like we're not early and when we're not late, we're like right on time. And I think 2023 and the cold bear, I think just culled a lot of things, and the strong projects did what strong projects do and continue to build dope shit and come out the other side. So the landscape has never been stronger looking. That said, with things turning up, there's going to be, wiry projects that come in from the side, but I think people are a lot more savvy now. Especially the people, there's going to be newcomers, but the people who have been through previous cycles. And you can see it, right? I always point to things like Off the Grid, or Dead Drop Wildcard. We're actually like very well connected with Katie and Paul, or a wild card. Like we've been part of that journey the whole way. So like those types of products that come from the same space we do, which is like we've been making games forever, and like have the tech understanding and the like decentralized expression understanding. So I think 2024 is going to be the big year, for sure, right? We'll see. For us, it's like that big key turn happens mostly at the end of the year. We're like ramping responsibly. We'll have a lot of marketing efforts over the course of the year, but a lot of it's as much planning as it is responding to how the audience interacts and has that feedback. And I suspect like the other projects are going to be following a lot of the same space. I think infrastructure wise, when you look at things like I was saying, like custodial wallets or royalties, or going beyond just like I have a token and I have some NFTs. That I think is also going to be something interesting to look at towards the end of the year. We started with the axes that are simple kind of Pokemons, and like people shit talk it, but like you got to start somewhere, and they're like first mover, first experiment, and we all learn from that. And I think we've matured and become more elegant, right, and more complex. And it's the trick now is going to be translating these things to players. And I always like take this sort of verbiage of it where it's like we don't call things NFTs or even token. Like Shrap is just Shrap within the ecosystem. To find ways to translate them to users and the like agency that they can do, or the words that we use, that removes all of that other crap and just makes it crystal clear what I have and what I can do with it, right? That's ultimately like all people care about. And I think we're all like, a lot of the industry is now on that same page. So yeah, I think 2024 is going to be like the bust out year for sure. And we're here for it.
Let's go. That's what I'm talking about.
Don, what's your favorite video game? We should probably find that out, of all time.
Well, of all time, I've been making games for 20 years, man. That's a really hard question. Because there's
That's why we ask it here.
There's different things that have like
You
different
can have a
places
few. That's
in my
okay.
heart. Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
Castlevania and Zelda. I'll
Okay.
just tell you now. That's how
So
old I am now. You can know.
so I will say the creative expression, and I don't mean this in the like creator tools way, but the creative expression of Rocket League, just physically is one of the most interesting and probably longevity games that I have. And I played World of Warcraft for a decade with like high-end rating guilds. So that's definitely on my like in my favorite games list just because of the social and teamwork element. But Rocket League, I played like it's the only game I've ever like paid for coaching and shit in to get to the highest tiers in. And just something so just so fucking simple, uh, and yet so wildly like every season there's some new meta and people are figuring out like things they can do that are just like mind-blowing physicality. Um, I think it's been this like tragically under-marketed game where you're like, how can you fuck this up, dude? It's a stadium with a ball and like rocket cars that people can focus and watch. It's not confusing, right? And but the things that have been marketed that people love watching is effectively like real-time chess in the form of MOBAs, like team chess, right? It's like really you think people want to watch chess more than the sports game? Like what? Something doesn't add up here, right? So for me, like that's one. It's probably the most interesting because I'm also like a gameplay dude from the industry, right? My beginnings were in AI and gameplay design and implementation. So anything that like feels that way is right up my alley, and I think it's some of the best. Back in the day, I was there was a game called Wing Commander Privateer. That was it sort of was. You're familiar with Star Citizen, like the Chris Roberts thing that made like they raised like $500 million from the community. It's a space exploration game, right? And it was the when Privateer is from like pre graphics cards. It's when you use like billboarding to represent 3D and everything. Even a little less rudimentary than something like Doom, but definitely in that space. But it did this thing where you started off on kind of like a backwater rock in the corner of some solar system somewhere on this like junk bucket that you had. And you thought, you're like, how much is here? And you kind of doing little like tasks for, and joining this like guild here. And then suddenly they're like, oh, you can equip a jump drive and you need this map that shows you where you can go. And it like opens up the galaxy a little bigger. And it happens multiple times. And so it was like, spacefaring and this growth, and suddenly your mind's like exploding of like how big the game is, right? And how big the galaxy is and all these different like cultural center planets and everything. And it was, even though it was really old in terms of the graphics, it was the first game I think that did that for me, and really like got my kind of game design juices flowing.
I love that. Now, I want to ask about AI a little bit because obviously, you come from that background. How do you see AI intermingling with Web3 and specifically with the gaming piece of it? Seems like there's kind of like there's crypto, there's blockchain, there's AI, and there's gaming, and all that's coming together in a really cool, weird, fun environment. Where are we with that, and what happens from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can see with a team like ours, and mentality and approach that we don't shy away from um, new and powerful technologies at all, right? We embrace the hell out of that shit. So in and we have a couple people, including myself, that come from AI backgrounds. So like um, we have a dedicated kind of small part of our team and task stream around AI tooling, and the partnerships that we have in that space. Some of it is related to work stream acceleration, right? So there's a lot of stuff you can do. The obvious stuff is in concepting. Like concepting was the like table stakes now. It's of course everyone's using I can use it for concepting and I can't draw for shit. So it was like imagine like an art director and what they can do with it. Moving beyond that to like, can we not just generate meshes that kind of work in 3D? Like there's definitely technology around that, but like good meshes that work in a game with the correct material definitions. So we've been working with partners of like, we need, if you're familiar with like how game engines work, like we need a material zoo that predefines the set of materials that get used within the space, right? Otherwise, you end up like compiling shaders every time you do it, and you run out of like it becomes untenable. So you have to, with the way like meshes were created, example, we have to go to the AI partners and be like, we need to be able to provide these and then give these sorts of like prompts or guidance, and get something that comes out that obeys and adheres to using that material zoo and these constraints on how the like mesh, like the topology works for the mesh and yada yada, right? So it's still very new, I would say, in that space. It's going to be probably at least another year before anything's usable, even for a low fidelity game or a highly stylized, like cartoony game, maybe, let alone for something that is photoreal, right? The delta between like generating a photoreal photo and a usable asset in a game is extremely large. It's just a wildly complex output space as compared to the output space of a 2D image. So we definitely use it in that regard. For our creator tools, we also want to use it, and like that's our kind of our second main exploration and partnership path, which is how can we use it to enhance what people are creating. We don't want to replace like people's originality. We still want to give them fundamental building blocks that are approachable, and that they can like use to make stuff that they never expected. But we don't want everything to just be people writing prompts and then like spitting stuff out, and that becomes like our entire ecosystem. Otherwise, people are just going to do that, and you're going to end up with like soullessness, like a lack of like brand and stylization. So we're being very careful about how we approach that, but we definitely want that to be like a plus up for people in the creation space for our user tools as well. And then there's like all the other, even when we were at HBO, we'd actually been investigating. We did all of our own like machine learning frameworks for deep fakes, as well as voice synthesis. So I kind of like, even in those days, voice synthesis and voice fonts were like, this would be a huge deal if we can do it. And I know, I don't know if you're familiar with the game The Finals. They kind of like got under, they were in hot water because they used AI voices to do the announcements during like over the course of the session. It's like an arena game with destruction. And I'm like, dude, like, of course you're gonna fucking use that. Like depending on your budget and the size of the game, like you're not gonna pay a voice actor, especially if you've never like directed a voice actor or done all that sort of work. It's way easier to just have this be text prompts that you're then using voice synthesis to actually like generate this at runtime on the fly. And like voice fonts are getting to a pretty good place to where it's so much easier to do that. And it also allows you, when I look at a game like Skyrim, for example, right, where it's like, are you going to record all those lines? It's way more malleable to be able to have, like have an engine that can generate dialogue based on what's happened and then have that translated to voice. Because you're never going to anticipate all the dialogue based on all the conditions, let alone be able to record all the voice lines, right? So it's not just like hey, we're going to needle out the voice actors. It's also like there's an entire expansion of this genre that couldn't exist otherwise, right? It could only like you would only be able to use text as the actual like voice in the game. You would never be able to actually use voices. So that sort of stuff I'm super interested in as well. Like we're not using that particular technology for Shrapnel. We don't have like heavy heavy like voices or anything in the game, at least at this point. But I'm like super bullish on that particular application in the game space.
Absolutely. And then, of course, we're super excited to play Shrapnel as well. So if you've got to jump and do some work, last thing we want to hear is we stood in the way between STX. So if you've got time to stick around while we dive into these topics, always great to get your 2 cents on them, but definitely don't feel obligated if we're standing in the middle of some dev work.
No, it's fine. I'll stick around for a little bit. We're actually gonna go drive more into east to northeast and go snowboarding for the weekend. So that's all I've got like going on is basically packing up the car and hitting the cabin.
Oh, I love it. I'll be getting my first couple days in. I'm in Denver, so just got back from Connecticut for some holidays. So
Nice.
next week we've got I think like Vale and Beaver Creek all teed up. So I'm excited to get out there myself.
Jelly.
Oh, dude. Well, anytime you want to do a Denver trip, go hit one of the events out here and want to go and shred, hit me up.
Yeah, ETH Denver's coming up soon, right?
Yeah, definitely is. Just a couple months around the corner.
I smell opportunity and fresh lines.
100%. Yeah, ping me. That'd be super fun.
All right, guys, let's head into our next topic. This one is the Bitcoin ETF approval. Obviously, there have been a lot of takes here. I actually want to toss it over to our legal expert, Mr. Jared. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the legal implications of the Bitcoin ETF approval, and then we'll toss it to the main man Don after that.
HODL, which is the Van Eck, I think is my favorite ticker. I want to just throw that out there. I think that was a good one. This is taking it into, so initially we had a Bitcoin futures ETF, and I think really importantly, there was the applications for an actual Bitcoin spot ETF, which is the difference. It's not much difference. It's difference in the way that it works, but legally there's not much difference. So when Grayscale sued the SEC because they denied it under being arbitrary and capricious, which basically means that they essentially didn't approve it because of dumb reasons. Essentially, that's basically what arbitrary and capricious means. So they had a Bitcoin futures ETF, which is already with the underlying asset. It's already being traded on ETFs. So there's no reason to not approve it. So now that it's approved and, Grayscale had to sue the SEC, I think it's really going to take a lot of onus to get the regulation going. So a lot of different regulatory bodies are trying, SEC being one. You got the CFTC. There's a lot of people that are saying, well, it's a commodity, meaning within the government. Because if, and this is really wild the way this works, but if they get to regulate Bitcoin, well, their budgets go up. They get to hire more people, right? And it's essentially, we're really important. Now, the way that the Constitution works is that Congress has to decide which regulatory body is going to regulate that. And they have not spoken. They have not ruled on that. They have not passed that. So all of these regulations from the SEC, the CFTC, and all the different regulatory bodies are essentially them going rogue and saying, well, we're going to start regulating it. What really needs to happen, and I think the next most important part, is when Congress sits down and says, okay, this is going to be an asset. It's going to be a currency. It's, it's already the currency of a couple of nations. So I think they're sort of limited, meaning Bitcoin, in the way that they have to do it. But what they'll do is they'll say, okay, things like, Ethereum, it's a smart contract. Those may have a certain category. Bitcoin obviously is going to be a little bit different than the rest. And they're going to say, okay, these are commodities. The CFTC will handle these. These are actually investment contracts. And then the SEC can handle these. And I think once we have that framework, it's going to just sort of open everything up. And then, me being a lawyer, I can say, okay, guys, you're not breaking the law. Here's what you need to do. As it stands now, it's a really gray area as far as, trading and investing here in the United States and also in the EU. And I think once that gets to the point of where Congress weighs in and, you'll go to the regulatory agencies, they'll do what's called rulemaking. They'll pass the rules and then you get to, have a public comment on them. Once that happens, I think this is going to be a whole new world. Will that happen in 2024? I think we can start seeing after the election, which is the most important thing in the United States government-wise for the next 11 or 10 months. Once that happens, I think the next administration in 2025 is really going to start pushing that, because this is AI is getting really big and cryptocurrencies, people are going to start caring about that. Your constituents are going to start to call and say, I want a part of that. And you have people like BlackRock and, some of the largest investor in the world who's actually participating in it. So it's going to be a huge boon for it. And I think, later this year and next year, it's going to be awesome. And I can't wait for that. So to be able to guide my clients and say, you're okay. Now I know what to tell you what to do. Now these are my best guesses. It's probably what it's going to be, but you don't know.
Don, what's your take?
Yeah, it's hard to add much more than that in terms of, I think that timeline is spot on, right? I think the more like emotional side is the signal that it gives in terms of like the political machinations that we'll see play out over the next year. And there's going to be an A/B decision point at some point this year. That's going to be a fork in the road, at least for a bit, because there's some of that momentum is not going to get changed one way or another. But I also look forward to a day when there isn't just a superposition of 8 different realities that we're all trying to account for with every decision that we make, and everything is like requires a 9-hour compliance call and just like mapping everything out. Like that would be fantastic because there's so much other like dope stuff to do other than that.
Nick, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is, and I saw somebody talking about this on Twitter. I wish I could remember their name so I could give them proper credit. Is just the fact that Grayscale holders got the first opportunity to get liquidity, which it's always tough. You see market reactions, and then it's sort of like, you're talking to that girl in the bar and she's like, that happened because Mars was in retrograde. So I'm not exactly sure that this is what's actually like happening. So let me put an
More
asterisk there.
crystals. Need more crystals.
Yeah, exactly. Gensler forgot to charge his crystals and BTC tanks. I'm in Denver. I'm in actually Seattle too. We're in like the crystal capitals of the world. I swear every person you meet at the bar, the third question is like, when's your birthday? I'm like, are you getting me a present? No, you're just going to tell me my future. Okay. So, the opportunity for these Grayscale holders who perhaps by definition, you can argue are a little bit more risk averse. Now, there was an opportunity to take a bet when Grayscale was trading at a discount and, things in January where you're like, okay, I can get really cheap Bitcoin here. So there are those people too. But you got to remember those Grayscale holders, anyone who bought in early this year or early last year were sitting on 3x gains, close to 3x gains if they got in close to the bottom. So it sort of makes sense that there would be this opportunity to take profits, which might be contributing to why we're seeing sort of this drawdown. It's interesting how I've only saw this identified in retrospect, rather than it does seem like that was sort of like a duh until it happened, Generally on the ETF, I'm just excited that regardless of, people talk about these massive inflows, people talk about, all the marketing. What I really see is just the low-hanging fruit of things to be excited for is before the ETF, everything before 2 days ago, 3 days ago, we've seen what Bitcoin can do. And when Bitcoin does those things again and goes on a savage run, it's just so much easier to FOMO. We've watched this on Coinbase where, when retail or less like on-chain native people want to FOMO, they FOMO to what they can buy on Coinbase because that's easy. You don't need, a wallet. You don't need to use DeFi. And now this is even easier than that, where, you could see Bitcoin really doing something crazy. And then you pick up the phone to your broker and you're like, okay, I'm ready. Throw in, 5% of my portfolio. So even conservative stuff, just having like an opportunity for less crypto native people to either FOMO in or do it as a small allocation into their portfolio, I think is very exciting.
All I'll add to that is that finally our moms can buy the dip and they can be very happy when everything goes away. next
I'm really excited for Coinbase too, because Coinbase is, I think has 8 that they're handling, and I think that's a huge big win for them. And honestly, they deserve it. They're doing great work.
Brings a lot of legitimacy as well to the whole space. Okay, so let's move on to the. This was very interesting. It was actually brought to my attention from a TechCrunch article, but they were talking about how Sony has a new digital birth certificate idea in imaging for some of their cameras. It's built natively within the camera, and it's basically like an NFT where they're just using digital signatures, but built within, like, meshed within the hardware. I could pass around the article for everybody who wants to do a deeper dive. but it's essentially an NFT that's meshed with the hardware, because they were stating that we're worried about AI and deepfakes, and we just want to make sure that we're able to verify the legitimacy of this particular capture, when they're using our cameras, right? So it seems like that is an interesting remix on NFTs, and it seems like, to me, this could be something worth talking about, worth kind of hashing out, because maybe this is a new angle to get to the same conclusion, but we just kind of want, different groups and different entities and countries and peoples and cultures are going to come at it from a different way. But it kind of seems like a very similar path that we're going down here.
Yeah, I'll hop in here. It's honestly one of the sort of use cases. Now, they might not be doing it directly through NFT and blockchain verified like infrastructure, but I think it really scratches at an important part and really a fantastic use case that's going to be, or let me say, to back up, it's a problem that we're going to run into that has to be solved. And from the solutions that I've seen, something like an NFT, something like a blockchain verified signature is going to be sort of essential in solving it, which is when you've got a world where anybody's image and voice can be AI generated, how do you prove that the video that just got pushed out from the White House is actually, the president? Is there a digital signature? Is there a way to actually go and verify that that is who they say that it is? And so I think, this is something that, Sony tends to be a little bit on the bleeding edge of some of these things. But I think that's, an important problem that's going to be scratched at, both from a private company standpoint of like actually knowing that you have a verifiable customer to, the absolute tip of the spear of, citizenship and voting verification and, sort of like proof of being, a real person. So the digital birthmark digital birth certificate is something that I think is going to be a trend that continues.
Yeah, this is,
I
I would
think.
say this is actually
Oh, good.
fairly old usage of this technology, right? Like, I know we're attaching the NFT moniker to it now, but like cryptographic signing of these things as validation has existed for a long, long time. I know AMC, I think it is, has a patent, because like when they, all the projectors now, you no longer like put the celluloid on a platter and feed it through the brain and everything, right? It's all digital, and they transfer films digitally over their own networks. And they use effectively blockchain and cryptographic signing to validate the content that they send to the projector, so that they don't have like a man in the middle and intercepting like legitimate content and IP that they own. Also, like Mark Mercuri, our blockchain dude, worked on this, something around this. I think it was like validating coffee bean production. So it was like, might have been related to Starbucks, because he's done some stuff for Starbucks on the blockchain side. That's like, like cryptographically, it could validate like the supply chain of where like this bag of coffee beans came from. So that sort of thing I think has been around for a long time, and this feels very much like it. In terms of the protocol and like decentralization and all of that underneath it, that represents the validator construct and the blockchain side of it, as opposed to just like cryptographic validation, which is very much like just public key, private key stuff. It'll be interesting with this to see like how far they go into that. Like, can you then go in? Is it a blockchain? You can go in and actually see in a public notion who's transferring what, where it's stamped, like what it's associated with. But yeah, it's great to see like these other sorts of industries. And this is the exact sort of thing like when we're doing Mercury with Neon, and that we had to do with Shrapnel. Like, this is where our brains kind of started going when we looked at the atomic building blocks that we had. Or like, we could totally enable some shit like this in just like a couple days.
I think it's going to be interesting for copyright too. So if you have an entirely AI created piece of writing, picture, whatever, you cannot copyright it, because you have to have some sort of human interaction, right? And that's the sort of the basis for it. And I think at some point when AI gets so good that you will not be able to tell, when you have to file for things like that, I think you're going to have some sort of authentication that you're going to have to upload with it. That's going to say, hey, this was a human created, piece of art, or a statement that I wrote. And here's the authentication from, say, the Sony camera that says I actually took it and it wasn't created from an AI tool. And I think that's going to be really interesting when we get to the point of where, this is a real person, this is a real statement, these are real things that are happening. And I think that the AI is really going to push that narrative. And I think it was last year someone tried as just to see what would happen when they tried to copyright something. The Copyright Office actually wrote back and said, hey, all the parts that have the human interaction you could get copyrighted on, but everything that was AI created, you cannot. So we already know sort of from the Copyright Office that you cannot have that. And a way to verify that, I think, is going to become important when AI is to the point of where it's going to be so close. How do you tell? And I think that would be a great, interesting point to use that with the camera. I think that's interesting.
All right, guys. Want to take us into our last topic here. This is a big one. This is one that I am personally very, 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 very excited about. But Ready Player One is they're in. They've teamed up with a group called Futureverse to introduce Readyverse Studios. And this is a legitimate collab with the Futureverse co-founders, as well as the Ready Player One creator, Ernest Cline. And they are absolutely targeting interconnected digital experiences across Web3, games, AR, and VR. And wow, it's going to be so much fun. So yeah, I think they're trying to bring like Hollywood, big brands, and really try to recreate what has really inspired all of our imaginations. Maybe not totally inspired all of our imaginations, but definitely been a contributing factor to a lot of people's imaginations about what is possible in the metaverse and with crypto gaming. I'm personally very excited for this. I've always said whenever there is something that is akin to a Ready Player One version of World of Warcraft, you guys may not ever see me in the real world anymore, because I will be just perma raiding and PvPing and on battlegrounds. So this seems like a step in the right direction. But anyways, I'm very excited. Would love to get you guys' thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm super.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm super stoked on it. In some ways, it feels like it was inevitable. For a creator of sort of like a thesis that many people use as like sort of the thesis for the metaverse to, still be alive and have the opportunity to sort of like capitalize it and work through like Warner Brothers. It makes sense that this would happen. This was, if you got the juice, you should use it. But super excited to see them sort of enter the space. As you said, certainly myself was very inspired by it. And often when people kind of come into the space, I'll sort of recommend it as like you must read, just to sort of open up like the brain of like what exactly is possible in this sort of like world. So no, super excited and would very definitely anticipating like what they're going to be building and how this actually, the rubber hits the road sort of past like the big headline. So we'll be interesting to see how this rolls out.
Yeah. And I'm excited for my kids. They're actually playing Shrapnel right now. I hear them screaming in the background, which is really cool. They love Fortnite, and one's 12 and one's 8. About to be 9. And the way that it works, it's almost like old school chat rooms. Like they would go into games like Fortnite just to talk to their friends. Because some of them maybe my younger kid he has a phone because we drop him off places and he's we sort of let him do a lot of things on his own, but a lot of his friends don't. And so to communicate with him, it's either calling on the parents' phone, which is akin to calling on the home phone way back, and it's like, I need the phone. And it's really funny to watch that. I'm like, I grew up with that situation. And so they go in and they interact and they'll talk about their day, or they may not even care about playing the game, but they're there to communicate and have that sort of sense of community. And I think that's a really, really big part of it that me being a dad of, almost a teenager, and a younger kid, I really see that, and I see like that is what they want. That is their future. Now, of course, they enjoy going outside, they do all those things, but this is really where they get that sense of community and where they are going to remember those things and like, we beat the Ender Dragon together, all those fun things. I mean, that's a big deal, and I think Ready Player One is. They would love it. I'll tell you right now, and that's going to be huge.
I have a lot of opinions on this topic. One of our pillars at the studio is we're not the metaverse, we're part of it. And in reflection, it probably should be multiverse is more like the notion of what it is, right? One of our advisors is actually Neil Stevenson, who was the father of the metaverse from Snow Crash. He lives here in Seattle. He actually lives like less than a mile from my house. So we get to interact with him a lot, and he's got that like futurist vision for everything, and certainly similar to Ready Player One, kind of like ahead of it, envisioned something that was this unified, like encapsulated space that people could come in and kind of there's different planets and different like zones and with different rules and like craft their own way of navigating it, right? And I'd say Fortnite is definitely like the closest to something like that. And the reason I use like the multiverse analogy is because I think that's probably it's going to be closer to the one that becomes a reality. These metaverse swings they're very tricky to do, and they are like in the truer sense of the metaverse, and that it needs to have a unified rendering pipeline, a unified way that things are just like described and displayed, that's encapsulated in this like one construct. I don't know if you're familiar with Philip Rosedale. He's the founder for Second Life for Linden Labs. And he took a swing at a framework that was called High Fidelity. That was it was sort of like metaverse / multiverse, but from an infrastructure perspective. When you think about what do you need to do to create that sort of thing? Well, you need to really create web servers, like a web server protocol. You need to allow people to be able to host their own portion of it at home if they want, right? And then you need a protocol that allows you to stream the data you need, the important stuff first, and fidelity comes in later, and all these kind of like technical constraints that make this sort of work. And underlying it from an ownership perspective, you need blockchain. And he was like way ahead of his time, like 4 or 5 years ago when he started like working on this. He was a too early example, right? But he's that sort of person. We're looking at it now of saying like, yeah, we're right on time. And this sort of approach to it, I think it's going to end up being just being like another isolated platform where people go similar to Fortnite, because that's the thing. But it's like yet another account and set of things that I have, and yet another account and things that I have, as opposed to being the multiverse where we think of like blockchain as being what TCP/IP is to the internet. It is to the potential of interoperability, like transportability, ownership, transaction, right? And on top of that, you build your own little verse, and then like the bubbles, the network bubbles start to form around these projects where they have super frictionless interoperability. And then like how, it allows what I think is a more natural human way to build, which is, no, I want like my own shit here. And now I'd like this other person that I'm friends with, I want to kind of glue my stuff to them. And it's kind of like the way we start to accumulate network effect, as opposed to these like, well, we're going to define the boundaries and we'll make the boundaries bigger over time, but you're still like in our bubble and you have to operate in our bubble. So like I said, I am quite opinionated on this topic. I understand 100% like both the IP value and momentum and exactly what they're trying to do. The standards side of it will be interesting, because like the old joke is you have 12 standards and you try to unify the standards, so that you have like a common standard across everything. And really what you end up is with 13 different standards at the end of the day, right? And you'd like very much run the risk of doing that. And I think the core of blockchain is one of those rare pieces where it represents a protocol where like maybe we've gotten over that a little bit. Like there's still slightly different offshoots of it, but there is a commonality. Like the proof is in the pudding that it is pretty easy to like bridge stuff, with especially with like recent technology, and that, like that sort of transportability is becoming much better, much more frictionless, much more obvious to the user what's going on. So that gives me hope in the multiverse, and not skeptical of these sorts of like metaverse plays, but I think they'll be their own places that are just going to try and accumulate as many users into them as possible.
Yeah, I'm very glad that you're opinionated, because otherwise this would not have been a fun podcast. So yeah, no, definitely opinions welcome. No, everybody's thick skinned, so definitely want to invite those here. But guys, I think we've tapped out these topics. I feel like we've really done a good deep dive into Shrapnel. Very excited that we got a chance to really sit down and have a long form discussion. Very appreciative, Don, of your time. Is there anything else that gentlemen, that you guys have on your chests that you'd like to just get out there and say to the world? Any closing thoughts here that we'll go ahead and wrap it on up?
I mean, 2024 is going to be great. Shrapnel, we're going to be part of it. We're always looking for other projects, other partners. One of the things I love about the space, like sharing notes behind the scenes, what works, what doesn't, right? We're still in that phase. And I think, in Web3, that's always going to be a little part of it, at least. So, aside from all the releases that we have that are happening over the course of the year, just like anybody who's out there is looking to start something or is in the middle of something and just looking to compare notes and groove, like we're here for it.
Amazing. Well, Don, thank you so much. Really appreciate everything that you're doing, pushing the space forward. Very much appreciate you guys as an official sponsor of the podcast. This wouldn't be possible without you guys. So thank you for all that. And thank you for building in the space. I mean, this place I deeply love and care about. So you guys are making it a reality, and very grateful for that. And also thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Jared, Nick, as always, gentlemen, a pleasure. And we'll see you guys on the next episode.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Thanks, Don.
So